Although the concepts of humanity and the natural world aren't always seen as diametrically opposed to one another, there are plenty of reasons why people tend to present them as opposite ends of a spectrum. In broad terms, human society is usually seen as much more rules-based and orderly, compared to nature being depicted as more sporadic and harder to predict, to the point where using the term wild would almost feel redundant in this context. While this sentiment is a fairly large generalization, it is still a belief that is held by many. That's why it can be very interesting to look into pieces of art that tend to blur the lines between nature and humanity. Two examples that showcase this are Spring by Lawrence Alma Tadema and Irises by Vincent van Gogh. Their contributions to this idea may seem subtle at first, but they actually work as parallels to one another upon further inspection. Spring is an oil painting by Lawrence Alma Tadema, a London-based artist who was born in the Netherlands. The painting shows a celebration taking place in ancient Rome, with a large crowd of mainly women and children laying flowers and playing instruments as they descend through the structures of a city carved from marble. The rooftops of nearby buildings are adorned with onlookers who also seem to be taking part in the festivities. Within the crowd, a golden banner is raised in the air with a Latin message and dedication to Priapus, the god of nature and fertility. Despite all the indications pointing to this event taking place in ancient Rome, there are also some prominent influences from Victorian England that can be seen. The children wearing flower crowns is reminiscent of the May Day tradition, along with the general aesthetic of flower girls and bridesmaids in wedding celebrations. Spring is a showcase of many elements that help differentiate the more human experiences from the natural world. The city that was carved from stone, the festivities that are formed from our religions, all elements that feel man-made, so to speak. However, the overall composition of the piece and some of the historical context for the painting include more aspects of the natural world than one may initially pick up on. The placement of people across the painting, from the top of the buildings to the bottom of the stairs, is done as though they're cascading down the image. Their heads being decorated with a vibrant array of flowers almost gives off the impression of a flowing bouquet, their individualism giving way to them becoming a blur of colors in a vast field in bloom. And although the painting is heavily implied to take place on a specific day in ancient Rome, Alma Tadema was known for mixing in bits and pieces from different points in time. There are archways and pillars in Spring that line up with a specific period in Italy's history, but there are other pieces of architecture that would have existed 200 years after those archways were completed. It almost gives off a feeling of relative timelessness, which tends to be easier to achieve in a more nature-based setting due to a lack of visible infrastructures you can pinpoint a date on, such as architecture or clothing. Despite Spring being a very upfront celebration of the human experience, there are deeper principles in the painting that connect it back to nature. Van Gogh's Irises is a bit different compared to many other still-life paintings he made throughout his career. The irises are still planted into the ground, as opposed to most other still-life pieces where the flowers would be in a vase or placed directly on a table. The vibrant purple and green of the irises contrast against the warmer tones of both the dirt beneath and the flowers in the background, which helps in drawing more attention to the primary subjects of the painting. Each individual iris in its leaves, despite generally flowing throughout the painting in unity, are shown through their line work to have their own unique structures and identities from each other. Irises seems to be a rather self-explanatory painting of irises, but there are a number of elements to the piece that aid in slightly personifying the flowers. Because of how low to the ground the point of view is, the irises end up being depicted as quite tall in the painting, giving them a near human presence in the composition. Van Gogh's decision to give each iris its own unique details helps to instill a sense of individuality to each flower, as if the viewer were a passerby in a street, bustling with unfamiliar faces. The framing of the painting also feels a lot closer and more intimate than would be expected of something like a landscape. Compared to how much space is given to the subjects in Spring, Irises comes off as almost more of a portrait of the flowers than just a wildlife study. While also visually giving each iris its own structure and form of order, the circumstances in which Van Gogh created this painting were also relevant in terms of finding structure. He was self-admitted to a mental hospital in Saint-Remy after the infamous confrontation with his ear, and it was during this time that he became more dedicated to continue painting. Van Gogh specifically chose to do studies of nature to help him stay grounded while he was recovering. The irises, in a way, contributed to him regaining a bit of stability in his life. In return, the irises were imbued with his interpretations of them, giving them a more distinct and human quality. Although it can be easy for people to separate and label humanity and the natural world as the inverses of each other, especially if you see them as having an order versus chaos dynamic, Spring and irises are fitting examples of showing the interconnection between those two. Spring shows when a painter treats a group of people like a landscape, An iris shows when a gathering of flowers is painted to look more like a crowd. If a comparison is to be made with the concept of yin and yang, and each side is a small amount of the other. For a final reference to nature being personified and humanity becoming unified with nature, a poem is provided on the bottom portion of the frame for spring. In a land of clear colors and stories, in a region of shadowless hours, where earth has a garment of glories and a murmur of musical flowers.